Goya throughout the whole project. Yeah. But I would like to really sing the praises of Anka van Wagenberg, our senior curator, the whole team. Yes, go ahead, clap. I'm very proud of the show. I'm proud of Anka's work on the show. The whole team, Amanda Beck, our curatorial assistant, and Kevin Garber, who's here tonight. Everybody, Amanda's here. There she is. I must say one little side story before we turn it over to Emily. We first when we tried to secure a complete set of Goyas, and no American institution would lend to us because many of them are universities which teach from the set, and we wanted a complete set for the full event. So what did we do? We found a museum in Western Australia, a sweet little museum that had a complete set. We were all set to get the Goyas from Australia shipped in an elaborate crate through customs. You can imagine that process. And it just became so incredibly expensive that we said, we can't do this. So then we sort of went to plan B, C, D, and E, and ended up finding a wonderful first edition, which you see before you, from the Art Gallery of Ontario, AGO in Toronto. Major museum, and they graciously agreed to lend to us, so we're very grateful for the Art Gallery of Ontario. The first edition, it's hand-colored, probably by an early collector, not by Goya, but that makes it extra interesting as well. Emily trained at the Massachusetts College of Art and Design, her BFA is from there. She went on to get her MFA at Tufts, and then was associated with the MFA in Boston, where I think that's where you study the Goyas in art collections. And now lives in Brooklyn. She also is the creator of the Soothsayers cubes that you see outside. So if you can put those two thoughts together in your head, you can get a little bit inside the head of Emily Lombardo. We'd like to thank Child's Gallery, who sponsored the exhibit as well and supported the catalog. We've done a catalog, made our largest catalog here in the museum. We're very proud of it, so please pick up a copy as well. So welcome, Emily Lombardo.
Great. Thank you, guys. So I'm going to try to get used to this microphone. Are you going to clip one to me now? I'm just going to use this. Okay. Only one microphone at a time. So I just really wanted to say how overwhelmed I felt when I first walked into these galleries today. I mean, this is the vision I've had for the project. I started it in 2013. To be able to have the works positioned right next to Goya so we can really see this conversation across this huge length of time, over a 250-year span, and continue to have this discussion. Like, this is exactly what I had envisioned, so I can't thank Ben and Anka enough for their vision and putting this together, and we just have really great passion for this museum and this community. So thank you so much to them for giving us this opportunity to really be able to look at these things. So a little background about me. I was born in Long Island, moved to rural part of western Massachusetts. The name of the town is Blandford, Massachusetts. I went to school, elementary school, there were like 6 kids. I ended up graduating from a regional school where there was about 60 kids in the graduating class. So it was very, very small, rural, country upbringing. So I had this kind of like country house, city house thing going on. So I was there, and I was feverishly drawing away my whole young childhood. And I made an argument to get into mass art a year early, so I actually got out of Western Massachusetts and moved to Boston when I was 17, where I was working and studying at the Massachusetts College of Art. And that's actually where my relationship with going to the MFA in Boston really started. And I will owe a lot of my art appreciation to that museum specifically. And that's where I would go see Goyas. I would see different works from art historical narratives. I would look at contemporary work. And I think all the work I'm making now is really trying to insert a narrative about marginalized identities. So what I was seeing when I was younger, I didn't really see myself reflected in any of this work. So I decided, as I became more mature, I was like, wait, I can just make this work. So who better to make this work with than Goya, who is also one of my most loved artists. The CAPRICHOS is a body of work that people just keep going back to and looking at over time because there's so much in it. Ben commented on this a bit. It is often considered the first work of modern art because in this work, Goya is being self-reflective and he's also being critical of his the society that he's currently living in. He's making a commentary on his critical history and time. So, having said that, these things that he's doing are all appropriate right now. So, like, we're going through these same kind of cultural issues. So, to be able to start from that vantage point, I went through the project plate by plate, not in order, and just kind of started to piece out how I can make this into a contemporary conversation that will speak to our cultural moment. So also, if you guys have any questions, feel free to just type in as we're going along. So when Goya starts making the Capriccios, he's sick. He's kind of sick at this time, so he's getting to the stage where he's starting to lose his hearing. So a lot of people say that accounts for some of the kind of disbalance in the way some of the etchings are designed. There's not too much perspective going on. They're kind of flat. Well, there's also this idea that he's becoming more and more discontent with how the upper class in Spain is so much more powerful and rich than the lower class. So there's this economic divide. He's looking at that, he's feeling very angsty about that. He's also feeling upset about the fact that the Spanish Inquisition is going on, and the church is all powerful. It's taking and taking and taking, so is the state. So he sets out to make a work of art that's an etching. An etching is an accessible medium that can be made and reproduced. So that's different than what we've been doing before, which is painting, right? So now he's making art through a method that can be assessed and accessed by the common people of Spain. So he set up the etching, and just as well, I also have never done etching before, so we did this thing where I had to be like, I had to learn this process, he had to learn this process, so I could be in conversation with him. This is quite complex to do copper plate etching. It took him 3 years to do the project. It took me about exactly 3 years to do the project as well. And that's kind of where we start with the portraits here. So I think it's a good way to kind of see like what's the similarities, what are the differences with me and this guy. I really have myself positioned more as a working class artist, so I'm a working class female artist. My hat is a bit smaller, so I don't have this big grand stature. Oh, sorry. My hat is a bit lower. And my clothing just seems more of a working class sort of situation. In my print, I position myself as Emily Lombardo, the printer. Speaking to the fact that I'm working as a printmaker, he is still positioning himself as GOYA, the painter. And especially in that time, it's a much, much higher, much more regarded thing to be a painter. Like there weren't printmakers back then, so to speak. So these are some differences between the two of us. He is working for the rich kings and queens, but then at the same time he's making this project that's really critical of them, critical of the society that they created. So he takes this project, he releases it in a perfume shop that's right outside of his studio in Spain, and within a couple of weeks pulls it off the racks because he's afraid the Inquisition is going to come down on him. Pulls them off the racks. Only 23 sets were sold at that stage, so maybe this colored set was one of those 23. And then in 1803, the Spanish king buys all the remaining copies and the plates to protect Goya from the Spanish Inquisition, which is kind of an interesting fact. In doing that, though, Spain has all the plates, and anybody who's noticed out in the art market, there's a lot of Capriccios and Goya's prints on the market because Spain owns all the matrices, all his copper plates. So posthumously, they continue to print his etchings. So these are really beautiful examples of like early prints, but you'll see that there are a lot of later prints that have lost their aquatint, they lose their grain. So this is an interesting fact. He managed to get the king that he was kind of mocking to actually buy the project. So it's pretty successful in that way. So the thing with this, and it actually was kind of serendipitous how this breaks up. The project isn't linear, and what we have here are 80 etchings, and it's basically imagery with text. And when you start looking at the text and the imagery, they really have a lot of tension between each other. They don't seem to directly speak to each other, so you have to spend a lot of time looking at these and be like, oh, what, you know, they're almost telling two stories. There's a lot of double talking in this sort of work. For the most part, I have just basically done English translation. From time to time, I change the titles a little bit more because we're doing total nonsense. But for the most part, mine are English translations with some changes and sometimes some gender changes. So you have these 80 works, and there really isn't a linear narrative around, but oftentimes it's considered as broken up into two movements. So it just so happened in this gallery, we broke it up into the same movements of Goya's work, because there's the waking movement, which is everything before the sleep of reason, which is page 43, and everything after the sleep of reason, which is the sleeping movement of it. So when we go into the other room, you'll see that a lot of the plates are more like nightmares. You get a lot more goblins, a lot of witches, and things like that. So fantasy really takes over for Goya. For me, I feel like we're and we all are, so inundated with so much visual language that most of my nightmares are actually pulled from actual news that you can see online. I don't have the luxury of fantasy as much as Goya does, because it's in our face at all moments. So, having said that, I was going to move around slowly with the camera thing. So, like I said, if you guys wanted to ask questions, the clusters of prints that go together. So I was going to pop over here. To this cluster, which is 18 to 20. And this, you'll see the parallel with Goya is very, very similar in these three. And for me, I was raised Catholic, not super strict Catholic, but I went to church, had the fear of the Catholic God. And when I got older and the sex abuse scandal came out, for me it was like the most shocking use of abuse of power. Like for me, it was like finding out how the firefighters set all the fires. I was like, it was painful, and it was really, I couldn't imagine anything worse, And what Goya is talking about in his etchings is a very similar idea of catch and reveal. So what I'm doing with mine is this idea that a trap has been set in this, and the perpetrators are falling, and there is this sense of there's some revenge happening in this print, and then the reveal is kind of when these younger people are able to reveal them on the internet or with the news. So it's a bit of a way of showing that there is a possibility of revealing these darknesses in the hopes to kind of squash them. 18 is kind of the starter for this. In Goya's piece, that's supposed to be a priest who's kind of come back from something going on back there. And there is a plate at the MFA that if you turn it over, there's a sketch where there actually is a prostitute or a woman in bed. So it's kind of getting this idea that maybe this priest has left, he's drunk, and he's left this person in bed. For me, in our time, I superimposed Jerry Sandusky in that situation, thinking about the idea of the coach is very close to a priest in our culture today. So really thinking about what that means to abuse that power in that position. So there is irony in this project, but it is very, very dark irony. So that's one movement there. These guys pretty much go together, and then I wanted to stop with this one, because this one is I really changed it up quite a bit, and you guys might recognize the chairs on the heads of the people. This is something that's so for Goya's time. Like, I could think of no exact replica of like trying to show like spoiled kids wearing chairs on their head. But, you know, I will, and I'll show you when we get into the other room with another plate on 53. I make a lot of commentary about contemporary art and contemporary art practices and how, in a way, almost it can feel a little gluttonous at times. So what I'm kind of showing here is Maria Abramovich and James Franco at the MoMA when they spent, who knows, 10 minutes, 20 minutes just staring into each other's eyes. They have a lot of free time on their hands to do that. Well, there's people that are outside of this museum construct who are really working hard every single day and don't have the luxury of to be able to sit for so long. Yeah.
Well, I wasn't familiar with the chair.
The chair one, yeah, it's showing some really spoiled kids, like being like, oh, they're so fancy, like they don't even need to like sit on their chairs, they can wear them. It's kind of like, it's very much about kind of spoiled, rich kids in a way. So that's happening in this, and when we go to another, to the other room, we'll talk a little bit about the diamond stole, which was one of the same sort of thing. So then there's the anthropomorphic section, which is the area where Goya is starting to use figures of animals as authoritarian figures, which is obviously supposed to be very funny. And so he's using a lot of donkeys in the place of, any sort of like teachers. So part of his struggle with issues of the Enlightenment is that he felt that in Spain, the people were getting, especially the young people, were getting a very, very poor education, especially if they were poor. But like the education level in Spain wasn't what was happening in the rest of Europe because of the trouble Spain was in during the Enlightenment. So that's what he's kind of discussing in this play. I kind of take that into our modern age of thinking about the idea of using creationism as a way to teach the way that the earth has begun. So if you look closely at mine, I've traded out the donkey for the sheep, and they're looking at a picture of Adam and Eve in a pond with a dinosaur, because a lot of creationists think that Jesus and Adam and Eve also hung out with dinosaurs, which is a great fantasy, fun fantasy. This, actually, I wanted to show you this one here. Is just all aquatint. Just a quick point at that one. So 32 is just aquatint, and within this animal piece, this one is also aquatint. So in all 80 pieces, they're all etching in aquatint, which means there's lines and then there's grayscale. The aquatint is the grayscale. But for some reason in these two prints, I think he was just playing around because etching and aquatint were new to him, but also aquatint was kind of new to etching at that stage, so he was one of the first people to really play with this tonality. So he made two that was just aquatint, which is actually a pretty complicated thing to do, so I just want to point out those two differences. And then he continues with the animals here. So we have the animal, the donkey is as doctor in this case, which obviously is not offering the best medical service that you could think of. And down here, I've kind of imposed the elephant, thinking about the Republican Party imposing issues of women's health care issues to our current situation. So we got the elephant there. And then, this is an appropriation of an existing painting. So this is a real comment on this painter who painted this painting of Trump that you may or may not have seen. And it's kind of a comment about the whole thing is kind of being ridiculous. Like, I don't necessarily stand behind body shaming people of any gender, but this whole situation of how we it's all about our image and with how the painter looks, and they're reflecting what they paint, but also how the person being painted always sees themselves in a different way as well. So it's all kind of very ironic. And again, this is his last one in this animal portion, and you can see the donkey is kind of riding the people in this. And it's really, he does this in a lot of his paintings where he has people on top of other people. And it's just really this way of very clearly illustrating how we kind of keep each other down. You know, we ride on each other's backs at the price of the person at the bottom. So I was thinking about moving into the other room. Is that cool? Okay. Come on in. Don't be shy. So this is the iconic, the sleep of reason produces monsters, which there's a lot of conversation that this was the original frontispiece for this entire body of work. But Goya, being as he is, kind of changed it last minute, didn't even put it directly in the middle. He put it at 43 instead of 40. So he's always tried to keep you a little bit on your toes when you're looking at this work. Nothing is straightforward. So I really like the way that this is colored. That's like so nice. You know, this is a very kind of classic representation of his struggle with the Enlightenment and this worry about losing rational thought. And like when rational thought escapes from the mind, there's all this risk of potential evil seeping in. So the sleep of reason produces monsters. For me, I'm not so much struggling with the Enlightenment like he was, but as a woman struggling with issues of having children, to have children, to not have children. For me, the elephants do in a way represent the Republican Party to an extent, but also they do, like, I always associate the elephant with that scene in Dumbo when the mom is kind of taken away from the baby, and it's like the most heart-wrenching thing. So it always makes me think about children and having children and what to do in that situation in a world that is so complex and so dark at times. You know, so this for me as a woman is a major struggle and burden as I'm starting to fall asleep. And on here I have kind of similar tools to him. I have my drawing tools. I've got my dog in the background, kind of keeping a safe eye. So this is the point in the collection where things are supposed to be turned upside down a little bit more. So I do feel like for Goya and for me, the things get a little bit darker in this room. In terms of the imagery. So I often, throughout this body of work, I'm looking at child exploitation. This comes up, kind of coming up again with this issue of using children as a method or a weapon again for hate. You know, so here we have child soldiers, but we also have a kid that was a part of the Westboro Baptist Church. You know, like not just hurting people with actual violence, but teaching children how to hate at a very young age. You know, like how that is one of the worst ways to impose education on an upcoming generation. So you'll see a lot of young goblins in mine, but they're often children that are being exploited. This is 53. This is a very popular one. So this is kind of piggybacking on this idea of the gluttony of the art world, and who better to discuss that with than Mr. Damien Hirst, which I assume you guys are familiar with him and the Diamond Skull. So in Goya's, his is what a golden beak, you know, and the idea is that these are a bunch of academics, potentially physicians, that are kind of praying to this false idol. But if you take a closer look, they're not actually praying, they're sleeping because they're bored off their rocker. And that's kind of what I have set up down here. You know, we have the Damien Hirst diamond-encrusted skull that everybody goes crazy for, but it's, you know, it's beautiful because of the diamonds, but it's not the most deep piece of artwork that has ever been created. So I have myself, and I was in my NFA now, so it felt so pertinent, but, you know, so I put myself in the front. Like I'm also kind of pretending to pray, but I'm starting to fall asleep. And across from me is James Franco, who appears in at least 4 of these prints. If you can find all 4 James Francos, maybe you'll get a prize. But he was known classically. He went to Columbia and a bunch of schools to get an MFA around the same time I was getting one. And I was kind of like, he can just buy as many MFAs as he wants. And this has been really hard for me to get the one. So he was classically taking photos of him falling asleep in class. So I felt like it had to happen. So that's what's going on here. But it is, again, a critique of back onto the art world. This is also James Franco. Yeah, you just got 3. You just found 3. Wait, there is one more. Yeah. So let's. You want to talk about this one? You love this one. Well, yeah. So this one is a bit of a departure from Goya's. This is one of the later ones that I did. So I started this project in 2013. I really wondered at times if I would ever be able to finish it. It's a lot, but I had to finish it. Otherwise, it would have just been lingering over me my whole life. And unluckily, a lot of really wild things have been happening in the news. So I was able to finish the project. And this was around the same time that Prince had passed away. And in this plate here, Goya's kind of talking about an older woman that's trying to make herself stay young looking. And I kind of use that as a vehicle here. We have Whitney Easton in the scene. It's much more of a theatrical scene. And she's seeing herself, her young self, the best, most successful version of herself. Prince is kind of ghostly in the background. And then in the back, you have a physician. And what I would say is like a big pharma person just kind of counting the money. It's just to kind of show how, awful this drug epidemic is and how it touches everyone. And at the end of the day, it's about money changing hands. It's not about anything else than that. So that's what this one is about. You can stop me if you want to at any point. So this one is over here in the corner, and this one and one other one that we're coming up to starts to discuss issues of climate change and just like what we're doing to the earth. So this one I was particularly freaked out by that floating trash island that supposedly exists somewhere in the ocean. So here we have, and also seeing so many images of young people picking through trash and pulling out recyclable materials. That's kind of what this piece is about. In Goya's, they're kind of holding back the light. He's talking about kind of people holding back enlightenment, but in mine, I have a bunch of young kids that are kind of holding back this huge pile of trash. It's about to crush them, but they don't know enough to even get out from underneath it. So climate change obviously isn't something Goya was talking about, so it's a good example of how I tried to really make this project speak to what we're kind of dealing with now.
What's this one about? The beetle? What's that?
This one? This one is interesting because it almost feels like it could go in the earlier part of the series. But this one was one of the earlier pieces that I did. And this is Lindsay Lohan, which, she's a tragic figure because she was a child actor, so it's again this kind of child exploitation situation with her. And the older she got, seemingly the worse things got for her. So she's kind of floating away. And to bounce back and forth, some people say that this is supposed to be Goya's mistress up here, and it's not necessarily saying the greatest things about her from time to time. So that's something we could learn more about, but that's what they say. Here, I have Lindsay Lohan kind of floating away, and I have the love bug on the bottom because her love bug movie was appropriately titled Fully Loaded, which unfortunately was a little bit maybe of a foreshadowing of what was going to happen to her in her career, and that's kind of her mother is kind of floating next to the car. It's kind of like an ominous situation. So again, thinking about, and this occurs in different ones where also a parent is very much selling out the child for fame and for money. So that is a reoccurring motif.
Are there any of his etchings that you absolutely have no clue what he was referring to? Or trying to say?
I think that I can never be positive about what he was saying with any of them. You know, I was really going as far as I can to kind of piece them out, but he never did any actual writing about this work himself. He never wrote about hardly any of his work. He was not known for that, but specifically this project, there's 2 sources of text about it, which many people think were his friends that wrote it, but he never takes ownership or discusses any writing that is pertaining to this. So, is there any that I don't? I mean, I think we're all kind of figuring it out.
You can't understand anyone's story, but
but some of them were huge puzzlers, huge. But he also was using a lot of mythology and fantasy, so because of that, I was able to make I've kind of seen this flying creature over here, so I was kind of almost able to piece a narrative together that way. What else do we got here? I think I wanted to show you. This is. Real quickly, we'll stop at 71. This one ties into the very final plate. And it starts to discuss this issue, which is in a lot of my prints and in Goya's, where, you know, people are using their sense of sight or their sense of hearing, but they're actually not capable of doing it because they're actually blind to what's going on. So here we're kind of dealing with the first atomic bomb, basically, and Robert Oppenheimer is sitting on it, and his eyes are starting to blacken completely. So it's almost like he's not seeing the full weight of this scientific experiment that he's participated in, you know, and this idea that when day breaks, we leave. It's like we just made this huge explosion, and now we're out of here, you know, and not really thinking about the consequences of that. So just taking note that his eyes are starting to black out, and as we go towards the end, that happens in a lot of the characters. This is another classic climate change scenario in mine, and this was one of these examples where Goya's kind of talking about workers, like hanging out, like after a long day, kind of, and I decided to bring this into contemporary conversation about climate change. So we've got the sad polar bear floating around on the iceberg while these 2 people are sitting on an oil barrel, like toasting some champagne and not really seeing what's going on around them. And it's better to be lazy is the title of that one. And it was really cool because this piece was blown up quite large to be included in this project around Manhattan called Art and Ad Places. So it was blown up to about the size of an ad that you see in like a bus stop or a phone booth in Manhattan. It was blown up and put right outside of a fancy brunch place. So there's actually tons of pictures of people drinking champagne and toasting while the polar bear is melting on the iceberg. So I was going to go to the last plate, which I think kind of summarizes the whole situation here. I mean, in Goya's, it's like, he's talking about daylight's happening. So like in this room and in this movement, it's mostly nighttime. So like all of the evils or all of the goblins of his series are about to go away, go into hiding because the light is coming up and they don't want to be seen. So for me, I'm like, what am I, this whole project, I'm talking about greed, abuse of power, racism, which can give way to fascism. So I kind of made all 4 of my final goblins or witches into these vessels that they're hollow-eyed with this idea that every generation, unfortunately, these vessels might go empty, but somehow they get reinvigorated. So it's this constant going forward, stepping back, going forward and stepping back. So my hope and my dream with this is that someday we won't keep going back into these roles. That's the idea. I think it's important to mention that I finished the project 2 months before the election. It really was, and I think this will start to speak to the Soothsayer project and needing to take the edge off a little bit for myself, but I was surprised to see somebody with racist tones and somebody that was quite willing to discuss taking my civil rights away from me that I had only just recently gotten. So to see that type of person become president was very difficult. But for me, I truly believe that as a people, we all share the same value of fairness and compassion. And though these works are dark, like the idea, so like, let's stop making these same repetitive mistakes again. And let's just not divide each other across class, across race, across gender. You know, and it will happen. It gets better and better every generation. So that's the positive part of this.
Thank you.
And if you guys have any questions, fire away.
Yeah, so it seems like you intentionally grounded some of your imagery in pop culture figures that would be recognizable to a contemporary audience. Did Goya as well, or did he avoid that? And how do you think about the longevity of
He
it?
totally did that. He did that. Like, there are figures in his prints that were like maybe the Queen of Spain's lover, and he was the head of the military. So like he had to be a lot more kind of tricky about it, but he absolutely was referencing people of his day at that time. And again, managed to get them to keep hiring him to paint portraits of them, which is amazing, even though he was very much representing them in his work.
I think it's possible that Goya was even more frustrated because Spain was so far behind. I mean, the Enlightenment had taken place in England and France and Germany. France had had the revolution. This was 10 years after the revolution, and they were still getting straightened out. So this is, I mean, Spain was way behind, and they were so frustrated with their king, and it's just really interesting.
Yeah, and that's why a lot of people say in that portrait that he's looking down on Spanish society. I don't know if he is or if he's not, but you know, that he's just disgusted with the fact that they haven't had the chance to move forward. And I think we still see that happening in lots of parts of the country, probably not far away from us now.
Right.
Yeah.
Has technology had an influence on etching today?
No, it's still almost the same way.
Same process.
There are some more healthy, we use less dangerous chemicals, but it's actually very much the same process. We'd get a copper plate. I rounded all the edges because I had a background in sculpture, so that was the first thing I knew I could do, no problem. I round off the edges just like Goya did. And then you put this kind of black waxy material on top that gets hard, and it's almost like a scratch board beyond that, where you take your etching needle and you're not gouging into the copper, you're just scratching away the black mask, and then everywhere that it has been scratched away gets put into an acid bath, and that makes an incision, which is why they call it intaglio printing as well. And that creates an incision, and inside that incision is where the ink is held, and the paper and the plate are forced through a press, where the paper gets forced into that incision, pulling out the ink and also creating an embossment at the same time. And then in terms of the aquatint process, which always happens after, pretty much the same. I had an airbrush version of aquatint that I used on some of these, which was actually a little bit less toxic. A rosin box is actually very toxic if you're breathing in rosin all the time. So I did, some of these were an airbrush aquatint, and then some of them were a traditional rosin box, which is this funny box that you shake up this dust, and then you cover up your mouth, and you put the copper in, and then you shut the door, and you run away. And then you wait for a minute, and it gets this perfect film of dust basically on it. And you heat that dust up on a hot plate, it adheres to the surface, and then everything beyond that, you basically created what feels like a very fine sandpaper on the surface of the copper. And beyond that, you put that in the acid, take it out, cover up more, and every time you go in, it gets darker and darker. So, most of the copper is exposed when it's the lightest, and then the more you cover it, every time you put it in, it gets darker and darker tone. So yeah, it's mostly the same. Yeah.
So my first question was, you already answered, which is, did you finish this before you knew Trump was going to be president? So because I feel, watching these, I feel it's like turning on the news, you know? So I'm wondering, you managed to finish it. You said it was sort of a grueling 3 years. You finish it, and then you wake up basically in your art project. How does that feel?
It was pretty jarring. It was very, very jarring. I'm almost glad I finished it beforehand because I might have been too chaotic to do it now. I almost feel like I could do another whole 80 in the past year. But it's best that we ended it when we did. Someone else can pick up the story at a later date. But it was definitely shocking.
Why James Franco?
Oh, because he's just so good at everything. For me, it's really because he was getting all those MFAs when I was getting my MFA, and I went back to school a little bit older, and it was a major decision for me to get it. And he was just like gobbling up MFAs, like they were going out of style. So I was a little bit. That's basically why. But he's a great actor, and he did do some interesting performance art with some other artists. Yeah.
So have you shown these to kids? Because it seems to me that kids, especially who read a lot of graphic novels, could really relate to this.
People often do kind of compare this to a graphic novel. And as usual, like GOYA is the groundbreaker that probably made the first graphic novel with this series. I have been lucky enough to have a lot of universities collect the work. So it's in the Mead Museum in Amherst College. The students saw the work at one of the print fairs, and they selected for their school to buy it, and that felt really great. The same thing happened at Wheaton College, also in Massachusetts. And Babson College has the entire series up right now in Wellesley. So I'm really happy to have it interact with especially like university age kids. I think it would be great for high school students as well, and hopefully you guys will be able to do that here. Yeah.
Well, how many original sets did you do?
Mine is an edition of 12.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, with a couple of artist proofs.
Great.
Thank you. Emily, one last question.
Yeah.
GOYA went on to do The Disasters of War. Do you have a hunger for doing another series?
I feel like The Disasters of War were the most appropriate thing for him to do at that time. Because
Are you going to do your own Disasters of
I'm
War?
not going to do it because they didn't have access to photography like we have today. So he was going. I don't actually understand how a frail old man could have gone out into the field and done this stuff, but he must have maybe had help. But he, the Spanish people needed those eyes to see what was going on because they didn't know. They didn't have the access that we have now. So I don't need to make another image of something that has probably already seen on Facebook a million times.
Well, thank you so much. Wonderful.